For years, this question hung over the royal wedding like a shadow no one dared to name. Why was Meghan Markle's family almost entirely absent from the biggest day of her life? The world saw it. Insiders whispered about it, commentators tiptoed around it, but publicly there was silence, especially from Prince Harry himself, until now. Because according to sources close to him, Harry has finally begun to open up about the pressure behind those empty seats. Not in the dramatic tell-all fashion people might expect, but in the quiet, frustrated admissions he shared with those who know him best. He allegedly described the situation as far more complicated than anyone understands, hinting that what kept Meghan's family away wasn't drama, wasn't logistics, but a secret so sensitive even he didn't grasp its full weight until long after the wedding planning had begun. And every clue, every hesitation, every missing relative leads back to the same place, a single blank space on Meghan's family tree. That's where our story begins. Before Meghan stepped into the world's spotlight as a royal bride, there was a detail buried inside her genealogy. A detail small enough to miss, but powerful enough to unravel everything. When Meghan and Harry's engagement was announced, British newspapers followed tradition and published a full genealogical chart of the future Duchess. Page after page was neatly printed, listing names, birth dates, locations, the royal family's preferred order and respectability on display. But right where Doria Ragland's mother's name should be, there was nothing. Just a void, a blank line, an empty space in a place that should never under any circumstance be empty. To most readers, it looked like a minor oversight. But to archivists, genealogists, and those familiar with how meticulous royal vetting is, the omission made no sense at all. A mother's name is the most basic element of any family tree. Its absence is not an error, it is a message. And that message was clear. Someone did not want that name printed. This blank was not isolated either. According to the records, the omission appeared in multiple documents across different sources in different formats, every single time dodging the same question. Who was Doria's mother? Why could no one for decades produce a name? And what kind of secret was buried deep enough that it would be safer to leave a line blank than to fill it with the truth? Because as the investigation continued, the empty space became more than a mystery. It became a warning that the story lying behind that missing name would eventually reach all the way to Windsor Castle and right into the heart of the royal wedding itself. Windsor Castle, May 2018. The world watched Meghan Markle glide down the aisle, a global symbol of modern royalty. But while millions focused on the dress, the vows, and the history being written, something far more telling was happening just a few feet away. On the bride's side of the chapel, an entire section stood empty, and in that silence sat one woman, Doria Ragland. No siblings beside her, no cousins tucked in behind her, not even a distant relative filling out the row. Just Doria alone, positioned directly across from Queen Elizabeth II. Her solitary presence was impossible to miss. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't ceremonial, it was stark. Those within the royal household felt the tension immediately. Sources say even the Queen was unsettled by the optics. A royal wedding is supposed to showcase unity, legacy, and the blending of two families. But here, half of that visual story was missing. It raised the unspoken question everyone felt, but no one addressed. Where was Meghan's family? Because weddings, especially royal ones, don't happen without intention. Every seat, every camera angle, every attendee is carefully selected. And the idea that an entire side of the bride's bloodline would vanish from the biggest day of her life, that doesn't happen accidentally. According to sources familiar with the planning, the decision wasn't logistical. It wasn't a disagreement. It was calculated. A choice made out of fear. That too much visibility, too many relatives, too many conversations over champagne might expose a secret long buried beneath the Markle lineage. A secret tied directly to that blank space on the genealogy chart. This is where the story gets really interesting. 8 months after the royal wedding, when the world had already moved on and the fairy tale glow had faded, the missing name finally surfaced. Doria Ragland's mother, the woman hidden behind decades of blank entries, was identified in official records as Janet Arnold, born September 4th, 1929 in Sandusky, Ohio, died December 27, 2000, age 71. On the surface, it looked like a simple archival oversight finally corrected. A missing puzzle piece finally snapped into place. But names have gravity, and once researchers possess a name, doors begin to open. Birth certificates, death records, church logs, cemetery ledgers, county files. A flood of paper trails suddenly illuminated Janet's life. Her parents, her grandparents, generations of people who had been invisible until this moment. But instead of a straightforward lineage, the new information created more questions than answers, because the details didn't align neatly. Dates collided, names overlapped in places they shouldn't. The deeper researchers followed the branches, the more tangled they became. And it quickly became clear that the reason Janet Arnold's name had been obscured wasn't because she didn't exist, but because once you said her name aloud, the rest of the family tree began revealing patterns someone had spent years trying to keep hidden. With Janet's identity confirmed, attention turned to her parents. And this is where the story crossed from mystery to something far more unsettling. Janet's father was recorded as James T. Arnold, born July 18th, 1909, died 1939, only 30 years old. Her mother was listed as Natalie Mae Allen, known as Nettie Mae, born June 23rd, 1897, South Carolina native, lived into her 80s, buried in Inglewood Park Cemetery, Los Angeles. Two parents, two lines. At first glance, an ordinary genealogy. But the records didn't stop there. They revealed the names of their parents, and that's when the entire structure of the family tree buckled under scrutiny. Nettie Mae's mother was recorded as Gertrude Elizabeth Sadler. Nothing unusual until researchers turned to James T. Arnold's side. James' mother was also listed as Gertrude Elizabeth Sadler, the exact same woman, the exact same birth year, the exact same records, one grandmother, two apparently separate parental lines. A family tree that didn't branch, it doubled back on itself. When laid out on paper, the structure was unmistakable. Janet Arnold's mother and father shared the same mother. The two people who gave birth to her were half-siblings, the kind of union historically condemned in every legal and cultural framework, even in eras where cousin marriages were accepted. This was not distant, diluted, or ambiguous. This was direct. And suddenly, the decades-long silence made sense. The blank space wasn't an error. The eraser wasn't accidental. It was protection, or concealment, depending on who you ask. Because acknowledging Janet's parentage meant confronting the kind of scandal that leaves generational scars. And in the world of royal vetting, this kind of discovery is not trivial. It is catastrophic. Once the findings surrounding Janet Arnold's parentage reached the upper levels of palace staff, the tone allegedly shifted from curiosity to containment. According to sources familiar with internal procedures, Meghan's lineage was reviewed with the same analytical rigor the palace applies to every incoming royal spouse. But this time, the genealogical discoveries didn't merely raise eyebrows, they raised alarms. Behind closed doors, advisors allegedly presented Harry with the implications. Not sensationalized, not emotional, just factual. A branch of Meghan's maternal heritage pointed to an alleged incestuous connection. Not distant, not rumored, but clearly implied through overlapping parentage in the archival records. The concern wasn't only embarrassment or scandal, it was legacy optics, public backlash, biological risk assessments that sources claim were quietly raised as theoretical concerns regarding future children, not as accusations, but as context. Every monarchy fears a headline that can overshadow its authority, and this was the kind of revelation that could dominate global media for years. So, a strategy took shape. Remove Janet's parentage from official charts. Her name could appear, but not her origins. Avoid public mention of Doria's extended family. The fewer relatives introduced to the spotlight, the fewer opportunities for curiosity. Maintain strict control over who attended the wedding. A contained circle meant a contained narrative. Protect the monarchy from unpredictable disclosures, not out of malice toward Meghan, but out of fear of the story attached to her ancestry. This was not a confrontation. It was a quiet recalibration, executed with royal precision. And in the center of it all sat a single truth. The palace preferred an empty pew to an unpredictable one. With the palace's silent strategy in motion, the pressure of managing the past fell largely on Meghan and Doria themselves. Their public dynamic has always felt selective, intentional, not strained, but measured, as if they move through the world with an understanding that less is safer. Doria appears only in brief, carefully curated moments. A wedding arrival, a documentary cameo, a quiet visit, and then she disappears again, slipping back into the privacy she has guarded for decades. Not many mothers maintain that level of distance when their daughter marries into one of the most powerful families on earth. But for Doria, silence may have been both shield and survival. Sources who have observed Meghan's relationship with her extended American relatives note the same pattern: distance, caution, and a reluctance to re-engage with the broader family network. It isn't hostility, it's removal, as if reopening those connections risks reopening the very history that was buried with them. The alleged revelations about Janet Arnold's origins cast a long shadow. Not because Meghan or Doria did anything wrong, they didn't choose their ancestry, but because that lineage carries a kind of weight, the kind that shapes behavior in subtle, enduring ways. A mother's quiet, a daughter's boundaries, a family kept at arm's length. It all fits into the same unspoken truth. Some stories are too heavy to carry in public, so they are carried in silence. And as the public saw Doria alone in Windsor, that silence became its own message. When the cameras panned across St. George's Chapel that day, the world saw a modern fairy tale. A prince, a bride, a new chapter for the monarchy. But hidden in plain sight was the detail that told the real story. Not the dress, not the vows, but the empty seats behind Doria Ragland. A quiet row of vacancy that held more truth than any headline ever released. Because the absence wasn't just physical, it was generational. It stretched back through Janet Arnold, through James, through Nettie May, back to a grandmother whose name appeared twice in a family tree where it should have appeared only once. It stretched through every document where the maternal line was erased, through every chart published with a blank, through every whispered conversation among advisors about what could never become public. And when Harry finally opened up, quietly, cautiously, about why Meghan's family was missing from the chapel, he didn't describe drama, conflict, or estrangement. He described complexity, pressure, a history he was still trying to understand himself. Because the blank space wasn't simply a missing name. It was a wound, one that had passed through generations without healing, concealed behind silence and survival. The palace could manage the optics. They could control the invitations. They could rearrange seating charts and remove names from official papers, but they couldn't rewrite what happened decades before Meghan Markle ever existed. That shadow followed her into the royal world, a hidden chapter of her lineage, a story buried out of necessity, not shame. A truth protected because exposing it would cause more harm than hiding it ever did. And so we end where we began, with a blank space on a genealogy chart that was never truly blank. A blank that held the weight of a century. A blank that altered a royal wedding, a blank that shaped a family's silence, and a blank that leaves us with one final question. If this single secret survived nearly a lifetime, what else might still be hidden in the parts of this story the world has not yet uncovered?